Malcolm Reed stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, gazing at the Atlanta skyline. The sunset painted the glass towers in gold and crimson, a view he'd earned through 20 years of grinding, innovating, and breaking barriers in tech. As the founder and CEO of Nexus Innovations, he'd transformed from a kid coding in his grandmother's basement to a billionaire whose face graced magazine covers. "Mr. Reed? Your daughter's school just called again," his assistant said from the doorway. "Third complaint this month." Malcolm turned, his shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. "What happened this time, Dana?" Zara made some comments to the janitorial staff. Dana's voice dropped. "Racial comments." Malcolm's jaw tightened. He'd given Zara everything, the finest schools, exotic vacations, designer clothes, but somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of their roots, of the struggles that paved their path. At 17, his daughter had become exactly what he'd fought against his entire life: privileged, entitled, and worst of all, prejudiced against her own people. "Thank you, Dana. Clear my schedule for next week," Malcolm said, an idea forming. "I need to teach my daughter a lesson she won't forget." Malcolm paced his home office, phone pressed to his ear. "Jerome, I need a favor that stays between us." On the other end, his head of security paused. "Whatever you need, boss. I need a new identity." Walter Jenkins, 54, former maintenance supervisor looking for work after being laid off. Malcolm's voice was steady, determined. "Complete background, references, everything solid enough to pass a school employment check." "Westridge Academy?" Jerome asked, immediately understanding. "Yes. And I need your team to create prosthetics, nothing fancy, just enough to change my appearance. Gray at the temples, subtle changes to my nose and jawline." Malcolm pulled up the school's employment page on his tablet. "They have an opening. Starts Monday." Malcolm hung up and pulled out a small notebook. He'd built his empire by always being thorough. He sketched out the details: humble clothes from a thrift store, a beaten-up sedan instead of his Bentley, a studio apartment rental in a working-class neighborhood. He'd need to practice walking differently, speaking differently, lowering his confident CEO voice to something weathered by years of struggle. In his bathroom, Malcolm studied his reflection. The man who stared back had everything society equated with success. But what good was it if his own daughter had become blind to the humanity of those who looked like her grandfather? Like the people who'd raised him? "Time to remember where we came from, Zara," he whispered, already beginning to transform in his mind. "And who we really are." At 5:30 a.m., Walter Jenkins, formerly Malcolm Reed, pushed a cleaning cart down the polished marble hallway of Westridge Academy. The prosthetics Jerome had created itched against his skin, but they'd done their job. The woman who'd hired him, Mrs. Harrington, hadn't given him a second glance beyond the contempt reserved for service workers. "Jenkins. These windows still have streaks." The facilities manager, Mr. Cahill, a red-faced man with thinning hair, jabbed his finger at a perfectly clean window. "Do them again. And when you're done, there's a mess in the boys' bathroom." "Yes, sir," Malcolm replied, lowering his eyes. Already, the weight of invisibility pressed on him, something he hadn't felt since before his first million. By lunchtime, Malcolm's hands were raw from cleaning chemicals. He entered the cafeteria to empty trash cans, head down as students streamed in from classes. That's when he saw her. Zara sat at the center table with her friends, designer bag slung over her chair. Malcolm's heart twisted. From a distance, she looked like his mother, same proud chin, same elegant hands. But the expression on her face belonged to someone he didn't recognize. "Ew, why does he have to clean while we're eating?" A blonde girl at Zara's table whispered loudly. Zara laughed. "Right? Like, do that later. Nobody wants to see it." Malcolm froze, trash bag in hand, as another voice chimed in. My dad says they hire them because they work cheap. You know how they are. Instead of objecting, Zara nodded along, then added, the new one looks sketchy too. My dad would never let somebody like that in our house. Malcolm's stomach clenched. The irony might have been funny if it hadn't been so painful. His own daughter, speaking about him as if he were less than human, forgetting that her own father, her own blood, had once been somebody like that. As he turned away, a boy deliberately knocked a tray of food onto the floor in front of him. Oops, the boy smirked. Looks like you missed a spot. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Malcolm looked up, meeting Zara's eyes for a brief moment. She quickly looked away, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face before she joined in the laughter, louder than the rest. By his third day, Malcolm had established a routine. He arrived before dawn, worked silently, and observed everything. In the break room, he met Loretta, who'd been cleaning Westridge for 23 years. Don't take it personal, Walter, she said, sharing her homemade sweet tea. Been like this long as I can remember. You just gotta let it roll off your back. Malcolm's disguise allowed him to become invisible, and what he witnessed shook him. In faculty meetings, he overheard teachers discussing those scholarship kids with barely disguised disdain. Black students were disciplined more harshly, their achievements questioned, their failures expected. My daughter goes here, he confided to Loretta during lunch, keeping his cover story intact. Single dad, working 2 jobs to give her better opportunities. Now I wonder if it's worth it. Loretta patted his hand. It's always worth it, Walter. My grandson graduated last year, full ride to Cornell. Had to put up with plenty, but he made it. Between classes, Malcolm watched Zara with her friends, noting how they avoided the few black students who weren't athletes. Once, he caught her switching seats when a black scholarship student sat beside her in the library. At night, in his rented apartment, Malcolm scrolled through images on his burner phone. Photos of Zara as a little girl sitting on her grandfather's lap, listening to stories of the civil rights movement. Pictures of them volunteering at his mother's community center in the neighborhood where he grew up. What happened to that girl, he whispered to himself. On Friday, Malcolm overheard Mr. Cahill talking to the dean. We need to discuss Jenkins. He's asking too many questions, getting too familiar with the students. People like him need to know their place. The dean nodded. I've received complaints from parents. They're uncomfortable with him being around their children. Malcolm clenched his jaw. He'd never faced such naked prejudice in his adult life, his wealth had insulated him. But here, stripped of his status, he was experiencing what millions faced daily, what his own daughter was now perpetuating. The annual Westridge Legacy Gala transformed the school's grand hall into a showcase of wealth and privilege. Malcolm, as Walter, had spent the entire day setting up tables, polishing silverware, and arranging centerpieces under Loretta's direction. Biggest night of the year, she explained. Where the donors parade around pretending they care about diversity while writing checks to keep things exactly the same. Malcolm nodded, knowing his own name was etched on a platinum donor plaque in the hall, a donation he now questioned. As the evening began, students in formal attire arrived to help serve and entertain. Malcolm spotted Zara immediately, stunning in an emerald dress he'd bought her last Christmas. She moved with practiced grace, her smile dazzling everyone she greeted. Jenkins. More ice for the West Bar, now. Mr. Cahill barked. Malcolm hurried to the kitchen where he found Darren, a black scholarship student, frantically trying to tie his borrowed bow tie. Here, let me help, Malcolm offered, expertly adjusting the tie. Thanks, Mr. Jenkins, Darren said. I'm nervous. The music director picked me to play piano tonight, but some of the kids are saying I only got chosen because of diversity quotas. Malcolm looked him in the eyes. Never let them make you question your talent, son. Later, Malcolm watched from the shadows as Darren played beautifully, his fingers dancing across the keys. The audience applauded politely, but as Darren returned to help with serving, Malcolm overheard Zara's voice. "That was interesting," she said loudly to her friends. "But my dad says they always have natural rhythm. It's in their blood or whatever." Her friends laughed, and one added, "Yeah, but it's not like he's going to Juilliard. He should stick to hip-hop." Darren froze, tray in hand, his face a mask of practiced indifference that Malcolm recognized all too well. "I actually got accepted to Juilliard's summer program," Darren said quietly. Zara rolled her eyes. "Sure you did. And let me guess, you'll need another scholarship for that too? Is there a problem here?" Malcolm stepped forward, unable to remain silent. "No problem," Zara said dismissively. "Just having a conversation that doesn't concern the help." Something in Malcolm snapped. "Miss Reed, I believe your father would be ashamed of your behavior right now." Zara's eyes widened. "Excuse me? You don't know anything about my father. And how dare you speak to me that way?" "I know more than you think," Malcolm replied steadily. "And I know he didn't raise you to treat people this way. You're out of line." Mr. Cahill appeared, grabbing Malcolm's arm. "That's it, Jenkins. You're done here." As Mr. Cahill dragged him toward the exit, Malcolm locked eyes with his daughter. For a second, beneath her indignation, he saw confusion and shame. The next morning, Sunday, Malcolm sat in his real office at Nexus Tower. He'd removed the prosthetics, washed away the makeup, and changed back into a tailored suit. On his desk lay 2 envelopes, one containing a donation to Westridge Academy's scholarship fund that would triple its size, and another with documentation of every instance of discrimination he'd witnessed that week. His phone buzzed. Zara was home from her friend's house. It was time. At the Reed mansion, Malcolm found Zara in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. "Dad. You're back early," she said, barely looking up. "How was Tokyo?" "I never went to Tokyo, Zara." His voice was calm but firm. She glanced up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Your assistant said." Malcolm placed a familiar cleaning badge on the counter. "I've been at your school all week." Zara's eyes widened in shock, her phone clattering to the floor. "What?" "No, that's not Walter Jenkins," Malcolm said quietly. "The new janitor who doesn't belong around decent people. The help who shouldn't speak to you." "Dad, I didn't. I mean, I never said." "I heard every word, Zara. I saw everything." Malcolm's voice cracked slightly. "I watched my daughter, whose grandparents marched with Dr. King, whose great-grandfather was a Pullman porter who put every penny aside so his children could go to college, mock a brilliant young pianist because of his skin color. Our skin color." Tears welled in Zara's eyes as the full impact hit her. "It wasn't like that. We were just joking. Would you have laughed if you knew I was listening? If your grandmother was listening?" Malcolm leaned forward. "Tell me, who are you becoming?" Zara covered her face, tears streaming between her fingers. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Malcolm took a deep breath. "Sorry isn't enough. Not anymore." For 3 days, Zara barely left her room. Food trays returned untouched. When Malcolm passed her door, he heard muffled crying. He gave her space, knowing some lessons required solitude to truly sink in. On Wednesday, Malcolm found her sitting in his study, surrounded by old family albums. Her eyes were red-rimmed, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, none of her usual perfect styling. "I found these in the attic," she said, voice hoarse. Pictures of great-grandpa at his janitorial job. Pictures of grandma marching. Malcolm sat beside her. "Those pictures were always there, Zara. You just stopped looking. My friends have been texting. Wondering where I am." She stared at her hands. "I don't know what to say to them. I don't know if I want to say anything." You need to decide who you want to be, Malcolm said softly. Not who they expect you to be. Zara nodded slowly, turning a page to a photo of Malcolm as a teenager, proudly holding a community service award. Dad, what happens now? She asked, finally meeting his eyes. That, Malcolm replied, is entirely up to you. 1 month later, Malcolm stood at a podium in Westridge Academy's auditorium, addressing the board of trustees, faculty, and students. As Westridge's largest donor, I've remained silent too long, he declared, his voice carrying authority that had Mr. Cahill shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Today, that changes. Effective immediately, I'm establishing the Reed Justice Initiative with a $50 million endowment. Gasps rippled through the crowd. In the front row, Zara sat tall, her expression resolute. This initiative will overhaul disciplinary procedures, expand scholarship opportunities, and implement mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff and students, Malcolm continued. Additionally, I'm pleased to announce Loretta Washington as our new Director of Inclusion. Loretta, in a smart new suit, stood to thunderous applause, led by Zara. After the meeting, Malcolm found Zara waiting with Darren in the hallway. Dad, Darren's starting a student alliance group. I'd like to help, she said, meeting his eyes with newfound purpose. Malcolm nodded, noticing the change in his daughter, not just her words, but how she carried herself. The designer clothes remained, but the superiority was gone. Later that week, Malcolm visited the school cafeteria during lunch. Zara sat with a diverse group of students, including Darren, laughing genuinely. When a tray clattered nearby, Zara was the first to help clean up. Your daughter's different now, Loretta commented, standing beside Malcolm. Whatever you did, it worked. Malcolm smiled. I didn't change her. I just reminded her who she already was. As Malcolm turned to leave, Zara caught his eye across the room and gave him a small, knowing nod, a silent promise to never again forget where she came from, and a commitment to help build a world where everyone's humanity was recognized and respected.